Okay, Erev Tov.
Erev Tov.
Well, if you thought that Shabtai Tzvi was fun, Shabtai Tzvi was a kind of gray, dry, boring personality in comparison to Yaakov Frank. Okay? If you remember, if you remember, Shabtai Tzvi, most of the time in his career, didn't actually participate in all of the wild and crazy things that his followers did. It wasn't him himself, for the most part, doing that stuff. And when it comes to Yaakov Frank, he was the life of the party. And what we'll do now is we'll learn a little bit about his lifelong party, and what the reverberations of it were. I will share with you the outline so that we can go point by point. And now I'm going to lose all your pictures, but we'll all see the screen, I hope, together. Let me just center it. Okay. So we're up to Yaakov Frank. First thing to realize is, I think this has something to do with what Don said last week. Don said very appropriately that you have like the vanguard, right? And then you have the millions and millions of people who just kind of like come along for the ride, like they support it or they accept it or they just take it in stride, and they're not really leaders. They're not really they're not the people pushing it or creating it or building it. But if it's there, they say okay. I think that is very, very true in the Shabtai Tzvi phase, but something about it happens in the Yaakov Frank phase. Okay, all of the people who just come along for the ride or just accept it or take it in stride, that's very easy if there's no major opposition. Okay, and that was actually the case with Shabtai Tzvi. Last week we learned about, what was his name, Rabbi Sasportas, who was like this lone voice in the wilderness calling out and saying, this is insane, this is crazy, there's no reason for any of this. And people just looked at him and said, why are you spoiling the fun? Or even more, I guess, seriously, you know, Jews look forward to the Messiah, and if Jews, are inspired by this, or Jews are comforted by this, or Jews are doing the right Jewish thing by expecting the Messiah, then who are you to wag a finger at all of them? They're just being good Jews. Good Jews wait for the Messiah. And then when the Messiah comes, they're happy, right? Why tell them not to be happy? Why yell and scream? And the truth is that people like this Rabbi Sasportas were who were adamantly and vehemently anti-Sabbatean publicly, as much as they could be public, right? They were a very small minority. And so it's like Don said last week, the vanguard could capture the people, but the masses. But what I'm going to add here is that works best when there's no major opposition. Okay? But think about what happened after the failure of Shabtai Tzvi. Not only did he convert to Islam, betray his people, but thousands of Jews around the world followed him into Islam. And for all practical purposes, they left the Jewish people. And all around the world, all of these Jews who expected the Messiah, and then they were happy when the Messiah arrived. Well, when the Messiah turned out to be, he was threatened and he converted to Islam, and that doesn't look like much of a Messiah. Most of these Jews were extremely disappointed, and it was a public communal tragedy. And it was a great shame, and it was a great disappointment, and it was such a letdown. The aftermath of that, oh, and one more thing. And even with all of the disappointment and all of the letdown, the thing didn't really even end, because you had these Sabbatean communities even afterwards in various places in the Jewish world. Most of them were in the Muslim world and in the Ottoman Empire, but some of them were in Eastern Poland, what is now Ukraine. You had Sabbatean communities there too. So the powers that be, right? You might, whether it's just popular opinion, whether it's the leaders of the community, whether it's the scholars, whether it's the wealthy supporters, all of these people are looking around and saying that this was awful, and this was even maybe in some senses evil, turned out to be. And it's still continuing. We still seem to have these people around, right? I told you last week about the Emden Eibschitz controversy, right? There's Sabbateans around. There's something to oppose. And when that is the case, you get this reaction, right? You have people up in arms and fighting this because the danger has been proven. So in 1722, as you see here in the outline of background and main points, in 1722 in Lvov, right, Lemberg, there was a rabbinic conference which condemned major Sabbatean heresy in Eastern Poland, which is now Ukraine. They condemn it, and they forbid it, they prohibit it, they maybe excommunicate certain people, okay? There's now a power that is opposed to this. It's not just you have this guy claiming he's the Messiah and all of these people saying, thank God he's here. It's not just that. Okay, that sees this as a major threat and is fighting it, is openly fighting it. We saw last week that didn't happen during Shabtai Tzvi's main career. Right? The rabbinic establishment itself, most of the rabbis said, wow, if he's the Messiah, great, wonderful, we've been waiting, right? Just like the regular Jews. A question from Jennifer here, yeah.
On the concept of excommunication,
Yeah.
you could kick somebody out of the synagogue, but how do you kick somebody out of being Jewish?
Jennifer asks, what is excommunication? You can kick somebody out of your synagogue, but you can't kick somebody out of being Jewish. Okay? That question was asked in very contemporary terms. Right? The supposition is you can kick people out of your synagogue, meaning that's the most you can think of that it's possible to do. But Jewish communities in the pre-modern world, they were autonomous communities that had a writ of it's called what's going on with my head. It's a privilegia. Okay, there was a writ called a privilegia between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish ruler. In this case, it would be either the king of Poland or these wealthy nobles in Poland. And the ruler who comes to this, makes this deal, he expects the Jewish community both to enforce things, and the Jewish community, those who he sees as his interlocutors, they have power. And the ultimate punishment the Jews have, Jews cannot execute anybody. That only applies to the non-Jewish authorities. But what Jews can do is they can exclude someone from the Jewish community. Okay, and then that person has nowhere to go. It's not that you're not a member of the synagogue. That's a modern concept. The Jewish community has like a writ of establishment. Okay, and if you are no longer part of that community, then you have no place to live, you have no place to be, you have no status. Jews aren't citizens. Yeah.
Let's say leave Poland and go over to
So could a Jew go to another Jewish community? In the Middle Ages, it wasn't as simple as it might seem, because each Jewish community was a group of households that got permission. Does this other person have permission? Well, the Jewish community may decide to welcome him or her or whatever, right? But the Jewish community doesn't necessarily have to accept the person. The person can really be homeless, okay? We're already now in the 1700s, and I'm not aware if it was completely like that anymore. But still, if Jewish communities communicated with each other in Eastern Europe, and if somebody was declared by, say, a court to be a Sabbatean, right, then it's quite likely that other communities wouldn't accept that person unless those other communities were controlled by Sabbateans. We're going to get to that, okay? Now, Yaakov Frank was born shortly after this. In other words, he's born into a world in which the authorities condemn and perhaps excommunicate Sabbateans. He was born in 1726. He eventually died in 1791. And right now we're just doing the main points. We're going to get to the details of the story afterwards. He is the second most important false Messiah in Jewish consciousness, is what I had meant to write here. I don't know how they got deleted. After Shabtai Tzvi. In other words, Shabtai Tzvi is the great false Messiah. Yaakov Frank is a biggie, but he's number two. The only reason the Yaakov Frank is number two is because Shabtai Tzvi came first, okay? And had Yaakov Frank been first, maybe he would have been the biggest one, because as we'll see, he was even more colorful than Shabtai Tzvi. Now, the major principles of Yaakov Frank, he would formulate his principles to sound Christian. They would be, in Hebrew you say, Duma Shma'i. He'd use phrases that have dual meanings. For instance, he used the phrase, HaMashiach She'ashuv, the Messiah who is destined to return. Now, what he meant is Shabtai Tzvi, is the Messiah who came and then died but is destined to return. He means Shabtai Tzvi, but it was very easy for Christians to see this as a reference to Jesus, okay? This will come up again, by the way, when we get to Chabad. He saw himself as the reincarnation of Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi needed to be reincarnated because there was work that he didn't finish. Islam he dealt with pretty well, but Christianity, hey, it was still open for investment by would-be messiahs. It's very important to stress the outward and the inward. Okay, he and his followers were outwardly Jewish at a certain point, or at a later point, Catholic or possibly Muslim. But inwardly, they were something else entirely. In other words, the Jews around them, had they known, or if they knew, that's not really being Jewish. Or the Catholics among them, had they known, or if they knew, it's not really Catholic, as we will see when we do the story, which we're starting right now. The life and career of Yaakov Frank, okay? When he was 12 years old in 1738, I didn't tell you about his family. His family was a Sabbatean family, first of all, okay? And they were merchants, and they would travel all over the place, Europe, and even into the Ottoman Empire. So when he was 12 years old, he was sent to Bucharest to apprentice with a merchant of fabrics and precious stones. If the family business is being merchants, then hey, you might as well have the son apprentice to learn to be a merchant. And doing this kind of business led him to all kinds of interesting places. Early on, he gets to Romania, but afterwards, he also gets to much further places in the world, and ultimately to the Ottoman Empire. Okay. In 1752, when he was in his mid-20s, he married a Hannah Cohen in Bulgaria. Okay. what her role in the story is doesn't appear to be too clear, but it's interesting that with Shabtai Tzvi, the big events happen when he marries that Sarah, who we talked about last week. And here we'll see that just in the years after he marries her, also for him, right, the big events begin to happen. And it could be, it's only theorizing, but it could be that she had some influence on him. And they do say that behind every successful man stands a woman who supports him. It could also be that behind every false messiah, if it's a male false messiah, that you have a woman who helps him build his messianic career. Maybe. He visited communities of the Dunme. I mentioned the Dunme last week. These are these closet Sabbatean communities that are officially Muslim. They pray in the mosque, and then they come back to their own communities to have this religion of the Bible and the Zohar that we talked about last week. The Ottomans gave him the name, okay, which means in Eastern European. And in 1752, he declared himself to be the Messiah and the reincarnation of our friend Shabtai Tzvi. The career is beginning. Yes.
What year did you say he called himself the Messiah?
1752, after he got married. Women seem to have a lot to do with messiahs. Or I should say wives seem to have a lot to do with messiahs. 1755, he returns to Poland, but not alone. He returns to Poland with all of his followers. And not only do his followers come with him, but new adherents in Poland, they take over several Jewish communities. Okay, in other words, there are now certain Jewish communities that are controlled by worshipers of Yaakov Frank. And now we are at the good stuff. I hope you're all ready. The big event that made history in it and its results in over the years of 1756 and 7 was the Wild Naked Torah Party. Okay, this is something that I don't think quite existed with Shabtai Tzvi himself, although his followers may have done stuff like this. Okay, what was the Wild Naked Torah Party? Well, he had some kind of event, a social gathering, a social event, a big party. And
Verbreng.
What?
Verbreng.
Verbrengen?
Yeah.
Perhaps that's what they called it in Yiddish. I don't know.
I thought you were talking about the news cycle, and I know there's new parties popping up, and I was wondering if, anyway, no, I realized that I was mixing up two things.
I didn't get that.
A different meaning of the word party.
Politics, parties and politics. No, I don't think, I guess everything has political, meaning, but here we're talking about people who like to party. And so let me tell you how they partied. They got together, and a young woman at this party stripped naked, okay? And according to some versions, she was the Rebbitzin. She was the wife of the town's rabbi. And the people at the party took a crown from a Torah scroll and put it on her head. Oh, I'm really not telling this right. I apologize. This was during Kabbalat Shabbat. During Kabbalat Shabbat, okay, she stripped naked and they put this Torah crown on her head. You can imagine that during Kabbalat Shabbat, they were singing. Kabbalat Shabbat is a singing custom, a rejoicing custom, welcoming the Sabbath queen. Maybe they were making her into the Sabbath queen, I don't know. But this is all quasi-Kabbalistic at least. And so maybe it has something to do with that. They put the crown on her head, and then all the people at the party would come over to her and touch her and kiss her, and they called her mezuzah, like you touch and you kiss a mezuzah. Okay? Now, they might have all had a great time at this party, except for the fact that some Jew who was passing by heard a ruckus go on in this house. He opens the door or knocks on the door, whatever, looks in the window, something, and he cannot believe what he's seeing. So he goes and reports it to the authorities. And, the Jews don't have a police force. So they, they pick a bunch of men, and they, it's like a lynch, and to stop this is a sacrilege, okay, to stop this from going on. And apparently they beat the people at the Wild Naked Torah party, and the establishment wanted to have this punished. Okay, they had a trial and they flogged the followers, right, of Yaakov Frank, who had this wild and crazy party. And at the trial, they admitted to several things. The people who participated admitted to Sabbath violations. They admitted to sexual relations with women who are nidah, and they admitted to exchanging wives. Okay, all of this came up in the trial. Nowadays, every possible sexual variation is publicly available on every screen in the world, and this stuff doesn't shock us, right? The shock value is gone. Some people may find this amusing. Some people may find this interesting, but I think the sense of shock has been completely lost. And Jennifer says it wasn't lost on her.
Well, I was just going to say, I am apparently a big prude because I was very shocked. But by the party. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying to me.
Okay, it's horrifying. Okay, so there is some shock left in the world, apparently. Jennifer here says so, and that was Christine who spoke?
Caroline.
Oh, Caroline spoke. So Jennifer and Christine still have this sense.
Caroline.
But in a traditional community, in a traditional world, for this kind of stuff to happen is just beyond belief. And it wasn't the first time, because Shabtai Tzvi's followers also did, I don't know exactly this, but there were stories about sexual licentiousness for his followers as well, whether he participated in it or not himself. And therefore, that's why in 1722 you have this war against it, to make sure like nothing like that ever happens again. And now look, it's happening again.
Except that at that time it was just stories and rumors. This time they took him on trial. And so during the trial, when you get it from the people themselves, it's not just somebody says this is happening, but in a trial, they admit to things like that happening.
Okay.
Then it was really an official kind of thing, and they had to do something about it officially.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Rabbi,
The truth is that I had wondered to myself whether it's that what you're saying or whether it's the opposite. In other words, on the one hand, you can say, okay, it's a trial and there's witnesses and and you question the people and you get a story from them, and so it's more there's more verity to it than the things that floated out around Shabtai Tzvi and there was never any trial. I hear that. I also wondered to myself, though, the opposite. I mean, was it a fair trial? You know, did they dig admissions out of people of things that maybe they didn't really do because they wanted to publicize how awful these Frankists are?
Avi, this
know.
is Lisa. Can I share two thoughts on that?
Please. Yeah.
Two very quick ones. So just it's at first it comes up when we always say everything's in the Torah. Well, the second murmuring that emerged in me was Pinchas, Cosby, and Pinchas, right? Pinchas, Cosby, and who's the third person in that? Cosby and
Cosby?
the story of Parshas Pinchas, Cosby.
Oh,
Right?
Cosby Batsur.
Cosby,
Okay.
I say Cosby, but Cosby Batsur, but who are the two participants again? And the second one that
The Sivet Av the Shimoni.
Shimon and Cosby. I say Cosby, but what I wanted to say, which is fascinating, and we're saying like,
Zimri ben Salun the Sivet Av the Shimoni. Yeah,
right. But, no,
Yeah.
all I wanted to say is like, could it be worse? But realizing even in that story, they're saying Petach Oel Moed, like that was opening in the tent. It was public. And they're
Mhm.
saying they were right there with a little of, if you look that way, little avodah zarah in that exact
Yeah.
moment. So,
Mhm.
and I just think it's very powerful to realize like we really have in the origin of Torah. And then the other thing, just a little illusion that it helps when I hear this too, is just the story
Yeah.
with Vashti and all the Yidden that came to, I think, do very similar things like this when they participated on Purim. I just wanted to share
Okay.
those.
That was Lisa, you said, right?
That's me, Lisa. Yes, from last week.
Okay. No, that's really nice. You bring up Zimri and Cosby because you know what that does? It makes this into like like you take a classic act of betrayal of God in the Torah, and
Exactly.
you do things
And
that
you
are similar.
enact it. You reenact it.
You
I mean,
reenact it, yeah. You
it helps
reenact
me.
the
I'm
worst
only
possible
sharing it
thing.
because it helps me digest. Like, thank God, in a good way. We do have almost every story in the Torah, so that in an easy way, I don't know, when we later in history repeat, we actually like. To me, at least, I go back to a source and I reframe things. And the last thing, just again, I know we have to go back, but what's interesting when you're saying that there was witnesses and punishments, the Rashi and all the Mefarshim in that original piece, that's so powerful that Moshe himself talks about the whole complication if he could be like a based in or a response, or was Cosby appropriate? I'm sorry, Pinchas was appropriate to take the action. And it almost, I don't know if it legitimizes, but it brings down of a lot of halacha and a lot of dark root.
Fantastic. You're right.
Really,
That's where Chazal say that
Yeah.
kana'im pogin bo. That,
Can.
that for an act like that, you don't need a trial, you just act.
So it's fascinating to me. It almost gives me like medicine to get out of my shock. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know that this wild naked Torah party accusation has happened in our times. It wasn't too long ago, about 20 years ago,
Yeah.
with that incident in the Reform Shul in Jerusalem. And one of the Haredi rabbis accused women of dancing naked with the Torah. And a lot of people took that seriously. And it was big news for quite a while. And it turns out that after this, the Haredi rabbi, I don't remember the names, and the Reform rabbi had to travel together to all the interviews and the disputations that took place, and they wound up being close friends.
Interesting. I didn't know that accusation was made.
Oh yeah,
Well,
I remember that one well, because the rabbi there's a friend of ours.
Okay.
I wanted to mention that that period of time there's also a sociological component to this. Is that this didn't happen in a vacuum? In other words, of course, the Sabbatean approach was something else, but at that time there was it was not just it was you had a general loosening of morals and general loosening of through the Enlightenment through that period of time that provided the sort of a background for people to experiment that they didn't have before. So it's
I wonder, I wonder if that's completely true, meaning that on the one hand, the Enlightenment it's not always taught this way, but historically it was this way. It was a deeply religious movement, and extremely Protestant. And I'm not so sure that it reflects a breakdown of morals on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're also talking about places that the Enlightenment did not directly reach. We're talking about Eastern Europe. Modernity didn't arrive for the Jews of Eastern Europe until the late 19th, early 20th century. And the traditional society continued until then. You had people read books and people heard things and people knew things, but traditional societies, well, Enlightenment wasn't there. Enlightenment wasn't there, but it's interesting. If you think about the time frame, Don, we're talking about the 1700s. We're talking about the decades before the French Revolution, the American Revolution and Constitution, right? We're still in an age of kings and an age where the various churches rule.
Yeah, but even in Poland, there were revolutionary movements in Poland as well.
We're going to talk about those.
Yeah, some of the leading American, like Pulaski, came out of the Polish tradition, the revolutionary tradition.
Nice. We're going to see that his life was intertwined with some of what you're talking about.
Hmm.
Let's just get to the end of the story of the Naked Torah, the wild Naked Torah party. There's another chapter to the story. After it happens, and after they have a trial and they flog the followers of Yaakov Frank, the bishop intervened. The bishop decided Yaakov Frank represented things that were very close to Christianity. And he intervened, and the Frankists actually went to him. And the Frankists demanded a couple of things. The first was that there be a public Jewish Frankist disputation. We had disputations in the Middle Ages where the king would force, a rabbi to debate a bishop, and the debate would go on and on and on. And the whole point was to prove that Christianity is the truth and is superior, and that the Jews, have a false tradition, and to try to get Jews to convert. In this case, it wasn't a Christian-Jewish disputation. What the bishop agreed to was a Jewish Frankist disputation, okay? And the Frankists won, at least in the bishop's eyes, and therefore the Jews had to be punished. In other words, the authorities who flogged the followers of Yaakov Frank, they needed to be punished. Some were flogged, there was a fine, okay? And also the Talmud was burned in a certain area of Poland. This is something always to keep an eye on. The Talmud being condemned or burned or cited in anti-Semitic ways. A lot of styles of Jew hatred focus on the Talmud. The Talmud is something that it's always easy to use as a straw man, okay, for getting the Jews. And this was really good for the Frankists because the Frankists were Sabbateans. And what the Sabbatean movement did, as we all know, is it basically, the Talmud is no longer relevant. Okay, the laws are no longer relevant. Part of the Messiah coming is to overturn all of these age-old laws. And so it's good to make the Talmud a victim. And we saw that the worship of the followers of Shabtai Tzvi after his apostasy was a religion of the Bible and the Zohar, but not the Talmud. Okay. I have no idea what the bishop thought about the orgies. I don't know. That you can get the question from the answer. Okay, so yes. They burned the Talmud. The bishop ordered the Talmud to be burned. Okay, 1759, a mass conversion to Catholicism by 1,000 people. Okay, along with Jews, 1,000 Jews. Yeah, all right, 1,000 Jews. I should write. Thank you. Okay, Yaakov Frank himself didn't just convert and become a Catholic. He did it publicly in the capital, in Warsaw, with the King of Poland himself as his godfather. Okay, and then there was another Jewish Frankist disputation, which not only, plugged on the Talmud, but a new issue came up, and that was the blood libels. Yaakov Frank asked the bishop, okay, to make blood libels a big topic in the dispute so that he could prove that blood libels were true. Okay? So Jennifer asks, so Yaakov Frank was a Jewish anti-Semite? You can call him what you will, but he tried to prove the blood libels were true. In the end, the verdict was that the truth of the blood libels has not been proven. Doesn't mean that they're false, but they have not been proven. And yet the Frankists win the debate. There was only one problem, and maybe this has something to do with what Jennifer asked about the bishop. What the bishop didn't get it, with the orgies. So shortly after this mass conversion, by shortly, apparently just a few weeks after the conversion, it became very apparent to the Catholics that this was all just a big farce. Okay, that they weren't really Catholics. And that they were, they may sound like Catholics, they may be in this, they have these awful relations with other Jews, but the Catholics, they were not. And so Frank was quickly exposed by the Inquisition in Poland. In all Catholic countries since the Middle Ages, there was an Inquisition. And he was locked up. This was his punishment. He was locked up in a monastery for 13 years. Okay, now, what happens for 13 years when he gets locked up in a monastery? Don't forget that he's the reincarnation of Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi also got incarcerated by the Sultan before the final end of the story when he became an apostate. And when he was locked up, he got the best treatment, and his followers got to come visit him, and he would urge them on, and they would bring him gifts. This is sort of what went on for 13 years with Yaakov Frank imprisoned in a monastery. The people would come and they would visit and they would bring him things and he would encourage them. And even from this monastery cell, he was able to get people to do his stuff. Yeah. They visited him, yeah. And many of them visited him in the monastery. Okay. In 1768, we have the Polish Civil War. This has some relationship to the things that Don brought up. Okay. The Polish Civil War has to do with identities. Part of the identity business has to do with whether you're Polish or you're Russian, whether you're Catholic or you're Pravoslav. And so Yaakov Frank thought he would get himself out of prison by turning to the Russian Orthodox Church, the Pravoslav Church, the Slavic Church during the Polish Civil War. He would aid the Russians, the Russian side, in this Civil War. However, it didn't work because, he turned to them, but there were also rabbis who turned to them. Okay, and said that this guy is not only a heretic, he's a meshugane, and he's insane, and he's crazy, and he's not for real. And if he tells you he's going to become Christian, he's not really going to become Christian. Look, he's in jail, by the way, for not really being Christian, Catholic. Okay. In the end, in 1772, he is freed from his cell by the Russians in the division of Poland. And this is where Poland begins to be, gobbled up by other countries. Okay. After he is released from prison by the Russians, he purchases a palace in Offenbach. And that place, while he still lived, was the capital of Frankism. He lives there for a number of years and a couple decades, and he guides thousands of families of followers until his death. One little detail that I forgot to mention, but it's appropriate to mention, is that in the aftermath of the Big Wild Naked Party, he was also, by the rabbis or the community leaders, they expelled him they expelled him, and he went to the Ottoman Empire. And some versions have it that while he was there, he became a Muslim. So he was Jewish, he was Sabbatean, he became perhaps a Muslim, he definitely became a Catholic, he offered to become Russian Orthodox, okay? And he didn't only party with people, he also partied with religions. He's totally all over the place. Okay, question, yeah.
Purchased the Offenbach Palace. All his followers gave him the money and he.
Jennifer's asking where he had the resources to buy the palace. That's the only thing I can come up with too, that if you have thousands of families of followers, then perhaps they enable you to do this kind of stuff. Another question here, yeah.
You can,
In Germany, Offenbach Palace.
Where is Offenbach? It sounds German. You can Google it. Okay. Maybe it's in Poland. I don't know. Yeah, Elisheva, I see your hand is there.
Wondering where his money came from. He sounds as though he's running an evangelical megachurch,
exactly.
and they are never short of money.
Yep.
It's got to be a lot more fun than one of those places.
Well,
All
you can see it in any kind of cult that happens.
Yeah.
You can see it in the ashrams. You can see it in all of these things. When you have a cult, and this is like a cult, really.
Mm.
And then the followers, want to give presents, as you say. They came to the jail even and gave him all kinds of things and enabled him to. And they think that he is the gift from God, and that they follow him, and he is their leader.
Mm-hmm.
This is the nature of a cult. He is a cult figure, and you can call him Messiah, you can call him Messianic, but it's basically a Jewish cult.
Okay. All right. It was certainly, we can give models from the world that we know, but it's certainly a very colorful Jewish cult, and in some ways a disgusting.
Either
Jewish
way,
cult.
they were before that. You can in history you can see Catholic cults and cults of priests and cults of these secret societies.
Well, look at Rasputin.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not something really unique in the world.
Meaning it's not unique to Jews.
No.
On the other hand, the Sabbatean movement and its various reincarnations, like Yaakov Frank, is somewhat unique, at least for the Jews. Meaning, you don't have things that are quite comparable to it in other parts of Jewish history.
No, but the same way, the secret cults within Catholicism is also not not very open, not very many. It's very unique in that. So there's always some kind of a cult that is unique to a particular society. And I think it's something that is very interesting. The totality of the world that you have in each culture, there is at least one something like that, like a cult that had put around it a lot of people. You can see it in Egypt, in ancient Egypt. You can see it in the ancient things in Mexico, and in all of the all over the world. You can see in different eras. You can see these cults coming with somebody, and remnants of that, and some things from that do get into the mainstream of the society. And I think that from the Frankists, we still have remnants of that within our society. If you're taking people that are looking at the Zohar, for example, as their way of being in this world, and taking things from the Zohar and making incantations and amulets and things like that. So those are remnants. I mean, it's not necessarily a full cult by now, but there are remnants of cults that are in every society, that you can see them in, almost not in a mainstream, of course, but really within the society, and accepted by a how shall I say, by a strata of people that are not necessarily very cultured or very culturally learned.
Okay. I think, yeah, for sure. Well, one thing that should be stressed, I think, about the two stories, meaning Shabtai Tzvi and Yaakov Frank, is that with Shabtai Tzvi, there was no war, right? It was Don's description that you have the vanguard and everybody follows. Here, there's already a war, because here, I don't know, you could say maybe the body of the Jewish people already has its, how do you say nogdanim in English? It's
antibodies.
Antibody, right. The Jews already have antibodies to this kind of stuff by the time of Yaakov Frank, and that leads to a real war among the Jews of Eastern Europe. Yeah, you're raising your hand, yeah.
Is there any description of the daily life of his followers? I mean, would they get up and go to Minyan, or to the mikvah, or to
Jennifer is asking what was the daily life, the kind of life of the followers. I don't know. You do have the descriptions of all the antinomian stuff, and you can wonder about how much they kept the other stuff, the regular stuff, going to Minyan and stuff like that. Jennifer's asking what identifies them as Jews, bichlal. And certainly, being Jewish is not the idea that, you have Judaism and it's a religion. That's an idea that didn't so much exist in 1759. That's a modern creation. It's a people. So even if you're not following the rules, then maybe you're thought of as a bad Jew, but you're a Jew, right? And okay. I also forgot to mention that Rav Yaakov Emden, who we talked about last week, was one of the people who, I don't remember, he might have been one of the people who went to the Russian Orthodox Church and argued against, Yaakov Frank. But there was serious scholarly opposition, communal opposition to this thing, and that's why it was more of a war. The war reverberates in Jewish history in ways that can still be felt to this very day. The fact that it was a war, the fact that you had this movement, this cult, as Chana is quite naturally calling it, you had it, but you also had major, powerful and vicious, even maybe justified opposition to it. And that war is the like the place that the Hasidic movement comes out of. Okay, the early Hasidim, the Baal Shem Tov and his students, the first couple generations of his students, it's the late 1700s, early 1800s. It's exactly this time. It's exactly a century after the catastrophe of Shabtai Tzvi. And it's still during the career, right, of Yaakov Frank in the very places in Eastern Poland, Ukraine, where the Hasidic movement develops. And this can maybe help you understand why there was such vehement opposition. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons why there was such vehement opposition to the early generations of the Hasidic movement. Because people said, especially scholars and community leaders said, these are Sabbateans or these are Frankists. Okay, and to some degree they looked like Frankists. Why? Because they were mostly uneducated, and especially because the Hasidic movement, especially in its earlier generations, had antinomian exhibitions. Okay, I'm not saying that there were any orgies, God forbid, no. Okay, but there were things about the early Hasidic movement that were antinomian. The most famous is the times for prayer. Okay, that the halachot that define the proper time to pray, the early Hasidim just let it go. They prayed, you could almost say, not quite, but you could almost say whenever they wanted to, even at times when it's not good or not right according to the halacha. And in a traditional society, you look at that and you say, what? It's also a matter of that the early Hasidim, they wanted their own prayer house. Usually in a Jewish community, you had the synagogue. That was the community place. That's why it's called the Beit HaKnesset, right? The place of gathering. And the Hasidim wanted to, they wanted to daven, to pray in their own way, in their own place, meaning they're withdrawing from the community. And you can imagine that the Frankists also withdrew from the community, and maybe this looks like a Frankism, okay? It wasn't Frankism, or some would claim that in the end it didn't turn out to be Frankism because of the opposition, meaning that the opposition prevented the early Hasidim from going in that kind of direction, okay? Whichever version you want to go with, regardless of which version you go with, the early generations of the Hasidic movement, that was the word I was looking for. This is the backdrop to the early Hasidic movement, and part of the reason for the vehement opposition to it. Okay. Now that we talked about the Hasidic movement and its relation to this background, we now need to talk about the next big Jewish Messianic movement, not in terms of itself, but in terms of how it relates to this background of Sabbateanism and Frankism. How does that relate to the next big Jewish movement for redemption, which is what?
Zionism.
Jennifer says Lubavitcher Chassids. Not correct. No. That's not the next one. Yeah?
Zionism.
Okay, Zionism. Well, was it Messianic? We can argue about and we'll discuss. That's going to be part of the discussion just now. Was Zionism redemptive? The answer is a definite, absolute yes. The Zionist movement saw itself, there's different kinds of Zionists, but all Zionists saw themselves as trying to bring a kind of redemption. It may not have been a traditional kind of redemption, or I'll whisper, it may have been, okay? It may not have been a religious kind of redemption, and then I'll whisper on the side, but then again, for some at least, maybe it was, okay? But the idea that this is a movement for redemption of the Jews, that was very clear, not just in its ideology, but in its very words, okay? The Zionist movement, the early Zionist movement, used words like Geula, redemption, okay? Even in very practical senses like Geulat HaKarka, okay? When Jews gave their pennies to the Jewish National Fund in order to buy land and plant trees, it wasn't called buying land. It wasn't called acquiring land. It was called
Geulat HaKarka.
Geulat HaKarka. It was called redeeming the land. Okay? And this idea of Zionist language is part of the discussion that we need to have and that we are going to have right now. Before I click on the next text about key points and texts about Zionism, okay, before I do that, I want to tell you about a 15-minute video clip that I saw. There's a series of video clips which are really nicely done. They're in Hebrew, that are called The Rabbi and the Professor. And it's an interviewer who sits at a table with Rabbi Uri Sharkey, who is a very, very interesting person and a very thoughtful person in many ways. And a professor whose name I actually don't recall, but who's like, I don't know, let's say someone who represents, I guess, the mainstream ideological views or political views of Israeli academia, okay, at least of the previous generation. And these two men, they sit across the table, and the interviewer poses a question. So in this series of The Rabbi and the Professor, there's one where the question that he poses is, did Theodor Herzl need to be a secular Jew because of Shabtai Tzvi? I didn't ask it exactly like the interviewer asked it, okay? But that's the gist of the question. The idea, what he suggested in the question, which he put first to Rabbi Sharkey, was the following. He said, because of the Messianic catastrophe of Shabtai Tzvi and Yaakov Frank, okay? That was a religious Messianic catastrophe. And because of that, and this is a very widespread notion, that because of that, traditional Jews, who nowadays we probably call religious, okay, the traditional Jews moved away from Messianism. Okay, the opposition to Sabbateanism caused, for instance, the Hasidim to look for redemption in people's hearts rather than trying to redeem the world or redeem the Jewish people. Okay, and that anything that smacked of, redemption of the world or the Messiah or something like that immediately got shut down by the powers that be because it smacked of Frankism or Sabbateanism or something like that. And therefore, suggested the interviewer, the only way the Jews could have built themselves a state was by secular Jews doing it, because religious Jews, after the downfall of Shabtai Tzvi and his followers, no longer had the capacity to do anything redemptive.
I want to comment something here.
Yes, go ahead.
Commenting that perhaps this idea of tikkun olam, which is so prevalent in conservative movement is so so much frowned upon by the Hasidic and ultra Orthodox community, perhaps because it is, tikkun olam, the whole world, and not really something to do with self. And that smacks perhaps from this getting away from the Messianic ideas of Shabtai Tzvi and Frankists.
Okay, I would suggest that the reaction from the more traditionalist side to Tikkun Olam has to do with antinomianism, meaning that the people who profess Tikkun Olam, like in Tikkun magazine, right? These are mostly people who are either anti-traditional or non-traditional. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. Many of them, or most of them, and it's like seemed to be like as an alternative to tradition on the one hand. On the other hand, I would put out a good word for Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, who I think was a very eloquent spokesman for a traditional view of the Torah that was married to Tikkun Olam, and he wasn't afraid of the term, and he brought the term into the way he thought about
absolutely. But he was the one who really was open and understanding of what this whole thing was about, and really felt that Jews should stick together rather than pull apart. And not only Jews should stick together, but Jews should really give from their light to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so
well, I think we're agreeing on his praise. When it comes to the specific business of a Tikkun Olam, I think part of what he was trying to do was to bring it back to life for the more traditional Jewish world, and also to show that it's part of the Torah to the wider world. But let me go back to it. We never finished the business of the Rabbi Uri Sharkey and the professor. So this was what the interviewer posed, that religious Jews no longer have the capacity to redeem anything in the aftermath of Shabtai Tzvi. It's just religion, it's personal, it's a best communal, and that's it, right? Versus secular Jews who found the capacity because they weren't frozen by Shabtai Tzvi. They weren't afraid of Shabtai Tzvi. They saw Shabtai Tzvi as a religious redemption. And so the way to avoid all of its problems is to bring a secular redemption. That won't be dangerous. Okay? And so the interviewer suggested that Herzl could only have been a secular Jew. Rabbi
I have a question. I have a question. Can I ask?
Yes.
We know that the first part of first repatriants were Hasidic. Like many Hasidic came to Israel in 19th century. Not only secular, even more. Most of people in 19th century were religious, Hasidic Aliyah. How they felt? They also was afraid of Shabtai Tzvi, or only Litaim were afraid of Shabtai Tzvi? How they looked at this?
Chibat Zion, I'm not sure that Chibat Zion was exactly Hasidic. Was Chibat Zion Hasidic?
No, but also Hasidic.
No, Chibat Zion, the ones that came in the 19th century to Israel, most of them were Chibat Zion. And Chibat Zion movement was not a Hasidic movement.
You are right. So also
Chibat Zion, if I may, by traditional Jews in Eastern Europe, It's one of its major supporters was the Netziv of Volozhin, the Rosh Yeshiva, who certainly was not Chassid. But on the other hand, many of the supporters were indeed Hasidim. Okay,
Yeah.
Hasidim may be slightly less afraid, right? It's the Mitnagdim who are so afraid. They're the establishment. They're the ones who are so afraid of Shabtai Tzvi and Sabbatean reverberations and heresies and things like that. The earliest waves of Zionism, what's sometimes called Proto-Zionism, was indeed traditional. That is correct. And yet Zionism is a political movement on the world stage that began with Herzl. Okay? And Herzl was most certainly not Hasidic, not Mitnagdic, not traditional, right? He was a Jew who thought in, at least he considered himself to be thinking in this worldly terms, even though many people thought he was crazy. And that's what the interviewer suggested. So Rabbi Uri Sharkey responded that who says that Shabtai Tzvi, I think, you don't have to agree with this, but it is something that causes a little bit of thought. He says, who says that Shabtai Tzvi's movement was religious? And who says that Herzl's was secular? What does he mean by this? What he means by this is that Shabtai Tzvi was going to bring the Jews back to the land of Israel. And he was going to do so by approaching the Sultan, right? And the Sultan would agree. Okay. Herzl also approached the Sultan, okay, a different Sultan, and asked, for a Jewish homeland or something in the land of Israel. It's easier to understand what Rabbi Uri Sharkey means if you understand a little bit about Rabbi Uri Sharkey. Rabbi Uri Sharkey does not believe in religion. He does not believe that there is something called Judaism, okay? And he says very, this is going to be challenging for some people. It depends on whether you agree with it or not or how you digest it. But he says, look what God said to Abraham. God said to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha. Go you from your land and your birthplace and your father's home. Ve'escha legoy gadol. And what will I make you? I will make you a great nation. Goy gadol, a great nation. He doesn't promise Abraham. It doesn't say in the Torah, ve'escha ledat gdola. It doesn't say, I will make you a great religion. Maybe that's what Paul thought later on, but that's not what God says to Abraham in the Hebrew. He says, I will make you a great nation, not a great religion. Okay, that's the promise. That's what Abraham has. That's what the Jewish people are. They're a nation. They're not a religion. Okay, and the very distinction, which is at the heart of the questioner's question, the interviewer's question, is the dichotomy between nationality and religion was a European Christian creation. It is not necessarily something which works well for the Jews. Okay, so that was Rabbi Uri Sharkey's response. The response of the professor was that you, Rabbi Uri Sharkey, you're a religious Zionist, which makes you a fanatical Messianic, and everything you may talk nice, but behind everything you're saying, you think that God is, the state of Israel was created by God, and you think that there's a divine plan, and it's very, very dangerous, and watch out for what you're saying. And there was one other point there that's slipping my mind. Well, maybe it will come back to me. Oh, yeah. His retort to that was that when I look at Zionists who have a religion and who believe that, and who believe in things that don't seem to make sense, and to do this in the name of Zionism. He got political, and he said, I see that in the supporters of the Oslo process. In other words, the professor accuses him of being against the Oslo process because he's a Messianic fanatic. So he accuses the supporters of the Oslo process of supporting it because they're Messianic fanatics. And then it's just a question of, who is really religious and who the fanatic is. So, is Zionism a secular movement? And how can you conceive of Zionism or the state of Israel as a Jew or even as a non-Jew? I want to start with a little survey. Okay, the survey is of 8 different ways to describe the state of Israel. Okay, all of these 8 different ways have been expressed by Jews. Many of them have been expressed by non-Jews as well. And you'll see that there's a spectrum here. Okay, number 1, the state of Israel is an anti-Jewish act of Satan. Okay? The state of Israel, in other words, is demonic. Has built this state, this evil state which calls itself Jewish, but in fact is a rebellion against God and the rebellion against the Torah. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps Zionism is Sabbatean or Frankist or something. Okay. Number 2, what is the state of Israel? A sovereign human power that dares to call itself by the name of Israel. Jews, bottom line, whether you're religious or not, are human beings. And human beings can create states, for better or for worse. The state of Israel is a state built by human beings that, with chutzpah and with overweening pride and with disloyalty to God himself, dares call itself by the holy name of Israel. But this non-Torah state cannot really truly be Israel. It should not be called Israel. Number 3, what is the state of Israel? It's simply a state ruled by Jews. You have states ruled by other people. Well, this state is ruled by Jews. Number 4, and this was Herzl's, a Jewish state, der Judenstaat. Okay, I've been told that the proper translation of der Judenstaat is not the Jewish state, which sounds nice in English, but rather the Jew state.
A Jewish state, a city.
No. The Jew state.
The Jew state.
Okay, which doesn't sound nice in English, and that's on purpose. Okay, the Jew state is a little bit degrading, right? And Herzl simply sees, this betrodden, this persecuted people. Also,
but you can't translate it like that, because in German, a Judenstaat means a Jewish state. The words you cannot translate. When you translate, you cannot translate word by word. If you translate, no, it's a Jewish state. It is. I do speak German.
Okay.
And Judenstaat it's a Jewish state.
Okay.
But can I just say, this is Lisa. Just on language, I just wanted to throw out, when I hear Judenstaat, I hear Judenrat. That's what
but it's a completely different thing.
I understand that, but I think there is something he's bringing up that has a common piece to it. I just wanted to say that. That's
what Herzl called it. Herzl spoke German.
As a German speaker, Judenstaat would mean Jew state. Yiddish would mean Jewish.
No, jüdische Stadt.
No, Yiddish is Jewish or Yiddische. Yiddische Staat. And Yiddische Staat would be a Jewish state, okay? Not to mix it up with Stadt, which means city,
Yeah.
okay? Which is spelled differently.
Yeah, it's spelled differently.
So their Judenstaat would be the Jew state.
Okay. I don't remember where I
I'm
heard
not
this.
sure, and I'm not sure what exactly.
I think it was in a reputable place. It can easily be looked up.
And it could also easily be looked up what exactly Herzl called it, but I'm not sure that he would call it like that.
The title of the book is Der Judenstaat. The question is, what is exactly the nuance of that? Okay. Number 5, a little bit more nicely, the state of the Jewish people. This already gives you a positive principle or a positive idea. The Jewish people is a positive idea. And this is going not just a state of the Jews, but a state of the Jewish people as a concept, as a people that lives and exists, their state. Number 6, the state of Knesset Yisrael. Notice the change from Jewish to Yisrael. Knesset Yisrael is the traditional term for this holy body called Knesset Yisrael, the body of Israel, the gathering of Israel. Excuse me. And this is almost a metaphysical concept, Knesset Yisrael. The Jewish people is a beautiful idea. Knesset Yisrael is even more metaphysical. And the name is also more holy than Jewish. There's nothing holy about the word Jewish. Number 7, the foundation of God's kingdom in the world. And that's quite a lot to say about the state of Israel. Sounds almost, Jennifer says it sounds Christian because you hear Christians talking about the kingdom of heaven, a phrase that appears many times in the New Testament. And yet, the very phrase, Jennifer, that we were talking about before, litaken olam b'malchut shaddai, right? The kingdom of the Almighty, right? It's also, there's a very fine scholar and teacher in the United States who I've never had the pleasure to meet. His name is Rabbi Shai Held. And he writes a lot about love in Judaism and love of God in Judaism. And he says one of the difficulties with it, especially when you deal with North American Jews, is that it's very hard to tell them that God loves you. Because as soon as you tell a Jew God loves you, he thinks you sound like a Christian. Because evangelical Christians, right, they like to say, God loves you. And Jews have this antagonism, right, that if there's something that Christians say, then it must not be a Jewish. Okay, so this is the same thing. The phrase, the kingdom of heaven, may appear in the New Testament, and it may be used a lot by Christians, but it does not mean that it's not a Jewish term. It is a Jewish term. And finally, number 8, a divine state, a godly state, the state, the country of God. Well, the 7 doesn't say that the state itself is God's. 7 says it's the foundation of God's kingdom in the world. Not that the country itself is godly. I don't know. Maybe they're not so different, 7 and 8. But they're not, 8 is stated much more directly. Now, all of these 8 different different phrases here are all taken from actual discourse, okay, in the historical period of Zionism. These are all different attitudes. If you want to use the anachronistic terms, religious versus secular, right? Because they may not be correctly applied to Jews, possibly. Then you would say, which ones of these appear to you people here with me? Which ones appear to be religious? Which ones, if you think that there's something called religion, and there's a religion called Judaism, and that Judaism is what makes Jews Jews, right? If you think that, then which of these sound religious?
7 and 8.
7 and 8. Very nice. Let's start with Richard, 7 and 8. The foundation of God's kingdom in the world. Yeah, that sounds religious. A divine state sounds religious. Hold off on 6 for a moment. Which other ones sound religious?
1.
Thank you. And
Yes,
also, Chana, maybe add also 2. Okay?
Yeah,
1 is definitely
definitely.
religious. It's negative, but it's religious. Unless you're religious,
it's what the Satmar, it's what
Jewish act by Satan.
It's what the Satmar Rebbe says.
Okay, yeah, the Satmar Rebbe. Okay, who is? Let me make this very clear for the coming learning together. The Satmar Rebbe, who says this, number 1, that it's an anti-Jewish act of Satan. Okay, even though it's negative religious, it's religious. Secular people don't believe that things are acts of Satan. At least you think they wouldn't. Okay. Now, number 2, a sovereign human power. That doesn't sound religious yet, does it? But notice the end of it. This is what Esther was pointing at. That dares to call itself by the name of Israel. What is that second part saying?
It's definitely religious.
But what is it saying?
It's saying that Israel is something other than should be human, or I don't have the vocabulary for it. To me, all of them are religious in one way or another.
Hold off on the others. But Elisheva, Israel that dares to call itself by the name of Israel. The first part of it too, a sovereign human power is something that a secular person could say. But
right. But the criticism is that it's human.
Folks, the idea is that Israel is something holy. Since Israel is something holy, since Israel is a holy concept, therefore no sovereign human power should call itself by the name Israel.
Of Israel.
Doesn't it say just that we are the ancestors of Jewish? We are there to say that we are the sons of Yaakov. Yaakov is Israel. Maybe we just say
we are Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Israel
so
is the name that was given to God by Jacob.
Yeah, but the question why is religious? It's a historic point of view. Yeah, we are saying that we are there to believe that we are the Bnei Israel.
Masha, you could call it historical, but think what the term means in the tradition. What the term means is God's chosen, God's beloved. Yisrael asher bo bacharti, asher bacharti bo. Okay? God's chosen, God's beloved.
Okay.
No sovereign human power that is only sovereign and human should call itself.
It's actually an act. It's actually an act against Israel that dares to call itself Israel, because by people daring, it's not God that calls these people and the land Israel. It's the people themselves that dare to stand up and call themselves by a holy name. So they made the land holy, rather than God should make the land holy.
Very nice. That's exactly the nuance in number 2, Chana. So number 2, it says secular sovereign human power, but the negativity towards that sovereign human power is because it has appropriated to itself a holy name that only God may call, that only God may choose. I want to also get to Knesset Israel. I think it was Masha who had said something about it. Number 6, the state of Knesset Israel. This is kind of on the borderline. Okay, Knesset Israel, on the one hand, is the people of Israel, the gathering of Israel, the assembly of Israel. Maybe that assembly should have its state. So maybe it could be secular. But on the other hand, Knesset Israel, like I mentioned, has this like metaphysical existence. And in that case, perhaps it wouldn't.
The same thing. The same thing. Yes?
What?
I think that's the same. If you say Knesset Israel, it also can be secular, something secular like Knesset, or it's metaphysical. And the same thing is the name of Israel, maybe historical and maybe metaphysical. Like
nice. Nice. It has 2 sides. Elisheva, for a long time, I was waiting to ask a question. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say what was already said, that, and there are people to this day who believe that Israel shouldn't be here declared by people to be a state, but to wait for God to do it. They live here and they live off our taxes, but they have that opinion.
Okay. If you notice the numbers 1 to 8, they're ordered in terms of negative, the most severe negative, to the most to the strongest positive, right? The worst thing you can say, this is an anti-Jewish act of Satan. The best thing you could possibly say, it's a divine state. It doesn't go from religious to secular, it goes from negative to positive. And what's possibly secular is in the middle, right? A state ruled by Jews, a Jewish state, a state of the Jewish people, maybe the state of Knesset Israel. What that shows you is that if you view the country in terms which could be secular, then the terms in which you view it will be less extreme. That you won't have the extreme negative, an act of Satan. You won't have the extreme positive, an act of God or a divine country or something like that. You'll have a state ruled by Jews, a Jewish state. Sounds very nice, state of the Jewish people, okay? That's why those are in the middle. Yes, Jennifer?
I have problems with the whole business of act of Satan. How much of a role does Satan play in Jewish thought?
Jennifer asks, how much of a role does Satan play in Jewish thought? What are Jews talking about Satan for? So remember, we just did Shabtai Tzvi and Yaakov Frank, right? And evil has its own positive existence, and there's demons, and there's Satan. This is Lurianic Kabbalah. You could say that in the Bible that Satan isn't much of a character and certainly isn't his own power, he's not independent. And for Chazal, you know, it's also not such a central thing.
Except in Eov.
But it's not so central. But in Lurianic
except in Eov.
No, even in Eov. Exactly what I meant, Chana. In Eov, he is not independent. He is simply the prosecutor in the divine court. That's his job.
Yeah.
Okay, he's not called Satan, Satan. He's called Has-Satan, the prosecutor.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay. Now, so we've seen these 8 possible ways of viewing things. All of them have something redemptive about them. Even 3 and 4, a state ruled by Jews or a Jewish state, right? There's something redemptive about that for sure when you're talking to millions of Jews in the Russian Empire, right? You can't think of it as not redemptive, considering the place where Jews were in the early generations of the Zionist movement. Now, I'm going to give you a preview on on what we're going to do both for the rest of tonight and for the next class. There is a fantastic book which influenced my life, and it was a fundamental book that millions of Israelis who either read it or heard about it were influenced by it. It's an amazing statement both of scholarship and of Jewish thought and of even political thought, okay? And that is this book called Haketz HaMiguleh Umdinat HaYehudim. The English translation has a much more boring title, Messianism, Zionism, and Jewish Religious Radicalism. It really doesn't get to the guts of the book. What this Hebrew phrase means is Haketz HaMiguleh Umdinat HaYehudim. Haketz HaMiguleh is a rabbinic phrase. Ketz means end, like the end of days, the end time, right? The time of the redemption. Miguleh, things that are revealed. You know, the Messiah could come, but he's not yet revealed. The redemption could be here, but people don't see it yet. It could be hidden. There's a famous rabbinic, there's a famous Midrash, which talks about Haketz HaMiguleh, the revealed end. Like when the end comes, the redemption comes, and everybody sees it, everybody knows it. It's so blatant, you can't possibly deny it. And what does that Midrash say? It's a Midrash which some of you may know. It's a very beautiful Midrash. The Midrash says, what is the ultimate Ketz HaMiguleh, revealed redemption? When the land of Israel gives its fruits to the people of Israel. That is the revealed redemption. Okay? It sounds natural. You know, you live in the country and, you know, sometimes the fields have crops. It sounds natural. But it's, in the view of the Midrash, it's not natural. Why is it not natural? Probably because, like in English, you have the phrase hell freezing over, right? The last thing you could possibly imagine about hell is that it freezes over. So if something ain't gonna happen, you say it'll happen when hell freezes over. That's kind of like what this Midrash is saying. You look at Jews. When will the land of Israel give its produce to the land of Israel? Basically, when hell freezes over. It was so unimaginable. It was so impossible. It was so against every human possibility, right? That the Midrash tells you that yes, if the Jewish people live in the land of Israel and it gives its fruits, then no one can deny that is the revealed redemption. So the title of Aviezer Ravitsky's book, for those of you who don't know him, he is one of the most fantastic and brilliant scholars of Jewish thought in the world. Unfortunately, he had an accident. I think it was a traffic accident maybe a decade ago. And since then, he hasn't been in the public view and doesn't participate in scholarship. I had the privilege to meet him once when he was before that accident, and he's really, truly both a scholar and a gentleman. And this book literally changed my life. I was a student at Yeshiva University, and they invited him to lecture before the book came out. And I even remember how he gave the lecture, the chart that he drew. I'm going to show you the same chart. The chart doesn't exist in the book, but the book should have had the chart. And I'm also going to show you the book, okay? When I offered Don, you know, when we talked about doing the course on Messianism, I knew this topic was going to be in it. And I thought, no problem, I'll get the sources from Aviezer Ravitsky. And then the same stuff hits, right? The Seger and the library. I couldn't have dreamed the libraries would be closed. I used to own this book both in Hebrew and in English. I could have even quoted you the translations from the English, right? But when I moved, You have to downsize your library. I gave them away. I said, no problem. It's always there in the library. And then there's no libraries. Thank God this week. Otherwise, I don't know what we would have done tonight. The Oranim library opened. The University of Haifa is still closed. There I could have gotten the English. In the Oranim library, they literally have 3 copies of this book in Hebrew. It must have, somebody really wanted to order it. This is the book. I took it out from the Oranim library. You see here a Mark Chagall picture of a traditional Jew yearning towards heaven or redemption or something like this. And you can see the title, Haketza Meguleh Umedinata Yehudim. The title is a paradox. And if you get this paradox, you'll get everything we're going to do for the next 20 minutes tonight and next week. What is the paradox between Haketza Meguleh and Medinata Yehudim? Haketza Meguleh is a redemption. It's a redemption that was promised by God. The Midrash even cites a verse where God in the Messianic prophecy says that I will give the fruit of the land to my people Israel. That's Haketza Meguleh. But what is Medinata Yehudim? Medinata Yehudim is the translation in Hebrew of Der Judenstaat, of Herzl's book. Okay? Medinata Yehudim is a this-worldly, human, historical construct that people build. Haketza Meguleh is wonderful. It is beautiful. It is perfect. It is utopian. Whereas Medinata Yehudim is what? What is it, folks?
Is a country like every other country, which was earned by war and lots of blood.
Okay, it's a country built by people in human circumstances. And in many ways, at least, it is a country like every other country. Some of us may question whether it's like every other country in every way. But certainly it is human and it is real life. Haketza Meguleh. Is it redemption?
I'll say something, Avi. Right?
Yeah.
This is creating this kind of false dichotomy, I think. You know, between the Gula as a divine act and this creation of a state of Israel by people, as if the two are mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
That the history of the Jewish people has been that we're in dialogue with God all the time. This goes back to Abraham arguing with God about Sodom and Gomorrah. It goes back to Moses and what am I doing here? Why am I here? Just go ahead and do it. So there's this idea that okay, we can only be if God does it, and it can only be if people do it. People do it, it's not good because God didn't do it.
No one says it's not good.
I'm saying
no, some people do.
It's a dichotomy. It's a dichotomy that's in fact, the way I see it is that we're in dialogue. We're dialoguing. Israel is Jacob is wrestling with God. We're wrestling with God all the time. I mean, so it's not like one or the other.
And I want to add. I want to add to that.
Hold on, Don. It's great that you made that point. Okay, because that point is a major part of what Ravitsky deals with in the book. Okay. Yep. The supernatural and the natural might be thought of as opposites or as a contradiction, but they also might not. They also might go hand in hand. And that is one of the possibilities he investigates in the book. So it's fantastic that you brought it up. At the same time, it's really important. Hold on, Hannah, a little bit. It's really important to get this before we go on. The contradiction is not mainly in the supernatural versus natural. That's not the main problem. The main contradiction is Ketz, even Ketz Miguleh, which is a perfect redemption, the one that God promised, versus Medinat HaYehudim, which has redemptive elements in it, but it is not the full redemption that was promised or that was dreamed of or what that was hoped for. In other words, to make this fully clear, Jews before Zionism, for the most part, could only imagine two opposite states, not states like country, but states like conditions, two opposite conditions. Either you're in exile or you have been redeemed. One or the other. We are in exile, we are oppressed, things are pretty bad, sometimes they're a little bit better, but regardless, we're waiting for the Messiah to come and redeem us, and when he comes, he will usher in a perfect reality, and all of God's promises will be fulfilled. So Jews could accept the idea of exile, and Jews could accept the idea of redemption. They had no problem with either of those ideas. And therefore, when Shabtai Tzvi comes along and says, hey, I'm the Messiah, the redemption is here, they say, yeah, it's about time. You know, we've been waiting. But the one thing that conceptually Jews could not imagine before Zionism is this. They could not imagine a partial redemption.
Oh, I really don't understand.
Exile, let me just finish the point. Exile occurred to people. They knew what that was. Redemption was going to occur. They knew what that was going to be. But a reality that is partially redeemed and partially not, that is not something that anybody ever dreamt of. And that is what Ravitsky's book is about. If you're a traditional Jew and you know the condition of exile and you know the promise of redemption, what do you do when redemption comes only halfway? The state
then
of
you
Israel.
remember the story of Yaakov and the angel. And you remember that actually Yaakov was the one that won, and that it is both to people and to God together to work on creating something different, some nation, some place, something, that we have the same responsibility actually to work together in order to create, because otherwise it's not that we have to sit and wait until what God says, because God came, Shaliach came, and Yaakov said, no, I'm not going to let you go. Okay?
Chana, I think that is your answer to the question of what to do. And it might even be mine, and it sounds very much like what Don said. But be aware that it is on this list. Okay. In other words, this list of 8 things that we discussed earlier, these 8 Jewish reactions were created by an historical circumstance, an undreamt of historical circumstance, that a partial redemption actually came. Exile didn't totally end. The redemption didn't totally come, but exile partially ended and the redemption partially came. So what the heck is that? Some people said, well, it may look like there's some good things, but just look at the bad things. And obviously the good things are illusions or they're tricks by Satan. Or you could say, fate of the Jewish people. This is maybe exactly what you're saying. And you could say it's a divine state. And the reason why it's not a full redemption is because it's a process. And the process has not yet concluded. Okay? all of these 8 different reactions were engendered by the reality of Zionism, which succeeded in a partial redemption, but not in the full redemption that was traditionally expected. And the idea that Don and Chana are talking about, that humans work in partnership with God, that is the basis, okay, for some of the reactions you see here. Probably reaction 7, maybe 6, and certainly 8 are based on exactly that idea.
Can I ask something?
Yes, please.
Yes, there is something that I am not understand, and I will be very glad that you will explain me. What as Hannah said is very, very true from the metaphysical point of view, but we have also the historical knowledge. We know what happened in the David kingdom and Shlomo kingdom and Yerovam and all the problems that Israel kingdom had. So I really don't understand why is the people in generation of Shabtai Tzvi, for instance, thought that let's say Shabtai Tzvi would be really big them to Israel, yeah, maybe. Yeah. So why they thought that everything will be ideal? Why it will be not like in the Torah time? We have all the problems of politics and of Hashmonaim, many wars between Jewish people. So the redemption could be in the time of Shabtai Tzvi, and people would came to Israel. But why they thought that something will be ideal? When they saw ideal Israel, we don't have such thing in the world. Why the redemption must be ideal?
Can I say something about that?
Masha, Anna, and Don, all 3 of you, you're fantastic. You're coming up with all the ideas that were going to be expressed. What Masha just added to what Don and Hannah already said is that you can look, that if you're trying to deal with a partial redemption, a reality like that, you should look at previous models, what happened in the past. Maybe things will be like in the past. And that is also something that happened. That is also at the root of some of the approaches we're going to see. Maybe even in a text that we'll see just now, if we have any time left, where someone reflects back the possibility of the Second Temple.
I just want to say something to Masha.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying, that why, and maybe I can, I don't know if my answer will be a full one, but if you look at the followers of Shabtai Tzvi and Frank and see what they are based on, they're not based on the Torah, they're not based on the Talmud, they're based on the Zohar, and the Zohar tries to make things, mystical and miraculous. So if you buy into this mystical and miraculous thing, then you think that you don't have to do anything. It's going to be a miracle, and it's going to be fantastic and miraculous, and that's what he's going to bring you. He's going to do zip, 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 and it's going to be a miracle. That's the Messiah.
Yeah, I understand what you are saying. I understand what you are saying, and you are right. Yes, it's very interesting. But I still don't understand the Aviezer Ravitsky paradox. Like, okay, the people of Shabtai Tzvi, you are absolutely right, I think. But why Aviezer Ravitsky sees here the paradox? He is not in the world of Zohar. He is in the 20th century. And why he thinks there is a paradox that when we are redempted and we are in our land, the land has...
I don't think he thinks of a paradox. I think he just brings the two together to show us that it's not really a paradox, that it's a combination of it.
Okay.
He personally doesn't see a paradox. He's talking about people who reacted to a perceived paradox. Richard, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, there's 2 things in here. Is the concept of redemption can be different.
Yeah.
I mean, what is redemption? That we're all gonna live in this heavenly thing with no care, and we don't have to do everything, and that God is going to take care of us. I mean, for me, the concept of redemption is very difficult.
Okay, that's
I really, I truly don't understand it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Richard.
Now, the second
Maybe
point.
redemption doesn't have to be perfect or miraculous. Redemption is used in the Bible both for end of days and Messiah, and also for very day-to-day things. Like, you have redemption of a field or redemption of a house, which is just a means to help get somebody out
Redemption of the
poverty.
firstborn.
Redemption of the firstborn is a little different, okay? But I think more fitting here is the redemption of the house or the land, because that's a case where someone has to sell his field because he's impoverished. And so a wealthy relative, there's a mitzvah to buy back the field. So the field will stay in the family. That's called redeeming the field. Because for the field to go to another family is not so great. And if a situation is not so great and you fix it, that's called redemption. It doesn't mean the world is perfect. It just means you fix something. You set something aright. And that also is called redemption. Redemption has a range of meaning, both from simple righting a wrong in the real world to, redeeming the whole world. And maybe, it can be more along the spectrum rather than the Messianic extreme. So it's also important to say that. And what you said, Richard, is going to come up in what we are doing.
Yeah, the second point that I have, is it possible to have the Jewish state without redemption?
That I would say is impossible for a very simple reason, okay? The prophets of Israel proclaim in their Nevuot Nechama, in their redemptive or prophecies, that there will be an ingathering of the exiles. Okay? That's what they proclaim. And that's what Jews have believed in for hundreds of, for over 100 generations.
And it's happening now.
And exactly. You cannot say that no prophecy has been fulfilled, because some of the prophecies have.
I wanted to ask the question. Rambam says us what is the signs of Messiah. Yeah, if somebody is Messiah, he must bring us to Israel. Yes, he must build the strong land. Yes, and to be stronger than our enemies. Does Rambam says that we must have ideal world in this land or not?
That's perfect. The example of the Rambam is the perfect example. The Rambam, on the one hand, tries to be very rationalistic. There's no miracles. The Messiah is just a guy with a big job. So if a guy starts doing the job, you just watch him. And if he does the job well, then he might be the Messiah. And if he completes the job, well, then you know he was the Messiah. But notice, even for the Rambam, the job gets completed.
Completed is the ideal state? Or
It's
just the strong state?
The Messianic age for the Rambam is as ideal as humanity can possibly be. There's one king over the world, that's the Messiah. The world is prosperous. Everyone knows God and studies philosophy. There's peace in the whole world. When that happens, says the Rambam, you will know that the Messiah came. There's no compromise. The Rambam does talk about stages. The Messiah won't snap his fingers and it all gets done in a second. And yet, the Rambam describes a redemption that is utopian.
Yeah, but you see, the Rambam says, you will know that he came when all this has been done. He doesn't say, you will know he is the Messiah and he will lead you there to fulfill that.
Correct. That's correct. But for our purposes, if we're comparing Ketza Meguleh to Medinat HaYehudim, the Jewish state, the Rambam, at least from what he writes, did not conceive of the Jewish state. He conceived of the Messianic world. It didn't occur to him that there could be a partial redemption. Okay? In the less than a minute that we have left, I really wanted you to see at least the first text. Long before the modern Zionist movement, long before even Chovevei Tzion, which people brought up earlier, Rabbi Moshe Sofer asked Masha's question. Okay, here's Masha's question. In 1839, he asked the question, the possibility of redemption in this world for the Jews. 1839, well before Herzl. והנה אפשר כבר היה ראוי מכמה פעמים להיות נגלים גאולה שאינה שלמה. Many times over history, says the Khatam Sofer, the Jews could have had an incomplete redemption. Oh, lasum shalom b'neinu uvein umot ha'olam shanu shochnim b'tzilam. Maybe we could have found a modus vivendi, some kind of peace with the nations of the world among whom we dwell. O yoter mizer, maybe even better than that. Liot geula mamash, kimo bait sheni v'chadome. Maybe we could have had an actual redemption, something like the Second Temple, where we ruled ourselves. Not a perfect world, not a utopian world, and yet a country where Jews govern themselves. Maybe that actually could have happened, says the Khatam Sofer in 1839. Aval ein chefetz bazeh. But there's no desire for such a thing. I think what he means is the Jews on the whole never really wanted such a thing. כי אם אנחנו אפשר שנתפשר ונקבל גאולה כזה, maybe for ourselves we could have compromised on redemption and gotten some sort of partial redemption like this. רק להיות לגאולה, for there just to be maybe like a Second Temple type redemption. אבל מכל מקום, he says, nevertheless, אבותינו הקדושים לא יתמצאו עתה our holy forefathers who are looking down upon us, who stayed Jewish in exile despite everything, who kept the Jews going in the hope of redemption, they weren't hoping for something like that. And they're looking at us, right? We also shouldn't compromise for something like that. He's not thinking of Zionism. What he's thinking of is the beginning of emancipation in the Aryan Empire, where Jews could just live in peace as subjects of the emperor. Okay? That's not what our forefathers lived and died for, he says. V'tov liYisrael lizbol orech hagalut. It is ultimately good for Israel to bear the long length of the exile, kedei shetihiyeh basof geula shlema, so that in the end there will be a perfect and complete redemption. That's the Khatam Sofer in 1839. Historically, naturally, it's possible that something like that could happen, but that is not what Jews should yearn for. Jews should yearn for something that is perfect, that is no compromise. Jews should continue to yearn for what their forefathers yearned for and not look for some kind of practical solution. It's possible to do that, but that's not what Jews should do. That was the claim of the Khatam Sofer, who was a non-Hasidic founder of what today we would call ultra-Orthodoxy. There's only one redemption that's worthwhile, and that's the one we continue waiting for. I don't have the date of birth here, but the date of death is 1839. 1839. Okay? Okay.
And this is this kind of thinking and this kind of idealism. I don't know if I could call it even idealism. This kind of blindness actually led to many of our people being destroyed in the Nazi concentration camps.
Why do you
Because he said to people, do not think even of going for a partial redemption. Don't go to Israel. Don't start going. Don't start thinking in a way that your forefathers look at what they have sacrificed in order to stay a big community, in order to stay together. Okay? If you start thinking of a partial redemption, you are going to be really chotim. How do you say chotim? You're going to be sinners sinning against your forefathers.
Okay.
So stay.
Now I understand.
So learn. So stay. So learn. So stay. So put your heads down. So get your big things and don't go.
Hannah, you're thinking about the rabbis who told Jews to stay in Europe on the eve of the Holocaust.
Right. That's what the Chatam Sofer was their mainstay of who they said he is the one that showed us the right way.
I think not mostly. It was more Hasidic rabbis, and this is 1839. This is not the 1940s.
Yes.
And the Chatam Sofer was a very astute person politically.
Yes.
I don't think it's entirely fair to say that if he had lived in the 1930s that he would have.
No, I'm not saying that. No. You misunderstood me. I'm not saying that if he lived in the 1930s. I mean that the rabbis of the 1930s said, "Look what the Chatam Sofer said." Yeah. He showed us the way. He's the one that told us, don't go for a partial geula.
Okay. When I first heard your question, when you began, I thought you were going to say something like Emil Fackenheim. The idea that the 614th commandment is not to give Hitler a posthumous victory. No. Hold on. Yeah, Fackenheim says that to choose to be Jewish is an extraordinary risk to put upon your children, right? The Jews who stayed Jews were ultimately, in a sense, right, responsible that their descendants died in the Holocaust. Had they not remained Jews, then maybe those people wouldn't have died.
No, chas v'chalila.
No, but there's a similarity of that here too. The Chatam Sofer, right? The Chatam Sofer is saying that it's worth staying Jewish in his sense of being Jewish, right? Despite it all, okay. Despite that there won't be a temporary solution, and I don't know. I think there's also a certain similarity to Fackenheim. In any case, we're not doing this to judge people, okay? Everyone can, each one can have his own judgment of the figures and the ideas that we're going to discuss. But he is saying that it's worth it. It's worth it to keep on as is, despite everything, and that's a position that also, it also deserves a certain amount of respect.
I don't think that we are judge somebody. I very understand what Hannah said, that we are judge persons. We're just talking about the kind of thinking when we say that we can't we don't must make compromise. Yes, we don't want to make compromise. So we are coming to Holocaust, yeah, because to have redemption, we must learn to have compromises. We have no another way. That's
Okay. Okay, so we'll continue next week. Next week, I will do the chart with you. We'll see some texts, and then we'll put together a chart which shows every messianic and non-messianic possibility within modern Jewish thought, basically. Okay. So
Are we going to light candles together next week?
Bezrat Hashem.
Oh, yeah.
Chag Sameach, everybody. Lots of
Hanukkah
lights.
Sameach. Bye-bye, everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Masha, you got me exactly.
Sameach,
Yeah, you also, thank you.
Chag Sameach.
היה מאוד מעניין, very interesting, תודה.
Bye, everyone.